we get both the physical and non-physical extend into and away from each other. So the idea is that these physical and non-physical, subjective and objective things push in and out. There's like pressure going towards and away for both. So let's go ahead and illustrate that. What I mean in a very abstract manner is to think of this, think of these as physical extensions. So this is physical, and it's, it's extending, okay? But it can also have the tendency to contract if it so wishes. So it's, it can fluctuate. This is, physical in the most abstract, purest form of physical we can describe. But then let's go ahead and allow for another concept, non-physical. And you can think of non-physical in some very abstract ways too. I hope you can see this, but basically, go ahead and we'll highlight it a little bit so that it stands out more. Okay, I think we're okay there. Basically, how this works is we've got the physical extending this way and the non-physical extending this way, or the non-physical contracting this way and the physical contracting that way. Basically, you can imagine all possible combinations of those tendencies back and forth, and that more or less is what we're going to assume is sort of the underlying reality or underlying barrier that separates physical from non-physical, subjective from objective. So, as you can see, even here, the vague ambiguity of the physical, non-physical is not only, implied, but it's embraced. I'm emphasizing it. And so this over here is more physical, and this way over here is more non-physical. And so, here's like a thought and a brain, or feelings and nerves, or sadness and, some brain chemistry. However you want to do this, or, to go interesting, the physical quality of the calculator and the forms of the geometrical aspects that make this thing a calculator versus a rock. So again, the use of the physical, non-physical, and how they mix and mesh, and how they're vague and ambiguous, we use that so that basically we're just looking at more non-physical versus more physical, and again, defining, a perfect separation between the two, obviously, is something we are already assuming we don't do. So again, I hope this isn't too abstract, but I also hope that it's quite abstract enough to encompass more or less a lot of things, so that as we get to where we're going and we move forward with the mathematics, this whole background to creation and formation of the equations as they are is understood, so that when you see me do a couple of things, it's not, well, why did he do that? It's that these are the fundamental assumptions behind what's coming. Some things are more physical than others, some things are more non-physical than others. So all things in existence are composed of subsequent physical and non-physical properties, which are dual aspects of the same quality. Okay. So now we're going to get into animate, inanimate objects. For an animate or observer object, physicality exists in an objective frame of reference. So, you listening to me right now is part of your objective frame of reference. And you are an observer or an animate object which has a physical existence, and in your objective frame of reference you're receiving information, and that you also non-physically exist in your subjective frame of reference interpreting what I'm stating in this statement. For an inanimate observed object, it physically exists as an object and non-physically exists as a form. Again, you could think of the physical existence of this cup being the fact that, okay, here it is, but that 2 pi r can give me the circumference of this thing, or that I can measure its length and its width and multiply it by 2 pi r and get its volume. That would be the more non-physical attribute of it, even though those are objectively used concepts. That is the more non-physical aspect of this object, because clearly none of this is actually exactly like, this is not a perfect circle, and we can never actually measure exactly within the limitations of Planck's constant the height or the width of this object. So it's always an estimate. There's always a distinction between the actual physical manifestation of the more non-physical form. So again, obviously we're cutting hairs in definition, but it is those fine lines of distinction in the general sense of these terms that allows for a much more useful way of using reference frames. I hope that was a complete sentence. Okay. These are just distinctions to basically allow for things like animate and inanimate objects to both have physical and non-physical aspects, objective and subjective frames of reference. And it's not so much that an inanimate object is making reference of anything. It sort of has like an empty reference frame, if you will. When you assume that things like rocks or electrons have reference frames, like, let's imagine that an electron or rock is making reference. That is not to say that it has senses. It's actually to make a deeper, stronger point as to what senses actually are. Inanimate objects have the ability to affect one another. So our senses, our way of receiving information is actually, when looked at from a physical perspective, it is more about the objective frame of reference of inanimate objects amongst themselves than it is about us, primarily because we associate ourselves with our subjective frame of reference. Now I know it's a very strange and complex concept for some, but here's a more general way of thinking about it. The only thing I know to be true are the experiences that I'm having at this very moment subjectively. And whether or not those subjective experiences really have a one-to-one correspondence with objective reality will always be a question. in a way it's almost as though I'm just sitting here talking to myself, regardless of anyone ever hearing this. So in that way, I am isolated in a subjective frame of reference just as much as an object is isolated from not having experience in the same way that I do. So to project the idea of subjective frame of reference or objective frame of reference onto something is even like this piece of chalk. Though it is strange, it has a mathematical basis that lays out itself very shortly. If I can shut up. Okay. The subjective frame of reference is of non-physical. So basically, in the subjective frame of reference, it's making reference of the stuff that is non-physical, and in the objective frame of reference, it is making reference to things that are physical. So it's sort of like the objective and subjective frames of reference are extremely intimately connected. They're interwoven. In fact, the definitions of objects are going to be completely defined by the interrelation of physical and non-physical attributes in subjective and objective frames of reference relativistically, believe it or not. So this is really the formation of a giant web or cobweb, if you will, for some. So as you can see, we're definitely making sure these things are completely interwoven and tightly bound so that you'll see that the general defining of these terms is what's allowing for us to make this weave that with tight definitions we can tighten into a coordinate system.